Hey guys, and welcome back to the Fly Dressing YouTube channel. Today we got a sort of a heavy episode for you. The thing is that I do some tying courses during winter in different shops and stuff like that. And one of the most requested ones is CDC themed ones. It seems as if quite a lot of people are a little bit afraid or doesn't really know how to use CDC other than like the standard tying a bunch wing style patterns. But it's a feather with so much potential for dry flies, especially I would say. It's quite good also for some subwater patterns, but we're gonna focus on different dry flies in this episode. And to begin with, why CDC? Why is CDC the favorite material for so many dry fly and trout fishermen all over the world? Well, thing is with CDC, it's quite a unique feather in the way it's built up. Here we have like a regular natural brown one. I don't know how good Robert's camera is, but thing is with these feathers, to begin with, they grow around sort of a gland on the rear of different water birds, like duck and mallard, etc. So when you see like one of these water birds reaching back and rubbing their beak in the rear, they're not sniffing their own ass actually. They're applying grease to their beak so they can distribute that evenly around their feathers so they become waterproof, more or less. And the thing with these feathers is all the different fibers on the feather have a lot of tiny sort of barbs, which combined with the natural grease from the bird makes them float really well, and they don't absorb water. If you would like pour water on this one, you would see it doesn't suck up the water at all. That is why the CDC feather is so good for dry flies especially. It's good to use as it is, but you see the stems on most CDC feathers are quite thick. So this sort of limits how you use it. You could hackle with them, but quite heavy stem, easy to break, builds a lot of bulk. So then we need to do something else. And I'm gonna show you that later on. But my thought with this little film is to actually go through some of my favorite techniques. I'm not gonna state that this is some sort of comprehensive, all-knowing guide to tying with CDC, but I'm gonna go through like the different techniques I use the most for tying hatching mayflies or caddis, caddis flies, and 3 different styles of upright CDC wings. These are like techniques I've been using for many years now, and they have proven their worth in different situations, depending on, I'll try to explain a little bit during the process. We're also gonna make a body of a CDC feather. A lot of the inspiration, of course, has come from some of the godfathers within CDC, like Marjan Fratnik and Mark Pettersson, not to say the least. I've had the privilege to fish with him a couple of times, and and see and get him and have him explain some of the techniques he's using. Yeah, there's a lot of good knowledge out there. So yeah, what do you say, guys? Should we get started? And I think we start with the hatching insect caddis, or we're gonna do a hatching mayfly actually, just to be specific. Okay, let's get started with the emerger, and I would say the way I do the rear of this fly is not important. So we're gonna sort of fast forward that, and when we come to the actual CDC part, we'll go it through more thoroughly. Okay, now we're at the CDC part. This is, as I said, a hatching mayfly pattern, some sort of Baitis version. And I tied it on the Hanak 390 clean camera hook. It's an excellent hook for emerging flies. Okay, a little bit about CDC quality. A lot of people talk, especially online, about quality on CDC. And I can't really say I agree that there is good and bad quality. Of course, maybe this tiny little sort of miscolored feather isn't that useful to that many patterns, but a small one like this one could be excellent for small, like F-fly style patterns, and this one is excellent for other kinds of flies. So don't always strive to buy CDC that only have the long, really full feathers. That's usually duck feathers, by the way, because when you're gonna tie like bunch wings, I much rather prefer something shorter and more dense, like the one I showed before, or something like this that's in between. Or if you're gonna do like full feather CDC wings, medium size is like usually better. It's more of the density of the fibers on the feathers than the actual length of the fibers, because if you're gonna tie like a size 22, you don't want fibers that's like 3 centimeters wide. They're gonna be way too long, and you're gonna have to pinch them off, all of them. So I don't think there's actually good and bad quality of CDC. Of course there's crap, but different kinds of feathers have different kinds of use. That's about all about the quality we need to talk about, I would say. But now we're gonna tie the wing sac of this little mayfly, emerging mayfly. And what I want then is I'm gonna use, it's like a size 16, so it's not a big hook. So I'm gonna use just one feather for this wing case. So what I'm gonna do now is pinch all the fibers together, tie them in with a couple of loose turns, and then I pull the feather in position, and I want like small, just the tips pointing backwards, something like that. So you have like, that's more like it, like 3 millimeters of fibers pointing backwards. Then I'm gonna fold the feather backwards, tie it down on top of the hook, Try to keep everything on top of the hook. And the thorax and the legs and stuff I'm gonna do with actually one of my favorite dubbings of all time. I'm sort of in love with this one. It's snowshoe rabbit foot dubbing from Nature Spirit. And this color, pheasant tail, that's sort of a dark olive with some brown tint in it. It's beautiful. Just gonna take a little bit of this one and dub it on like just regular dubbing technique. That should do it. Make quite a dense thorax. Yeah, that's about it. I'm gonna take a needle, or if you have like a brush is good also, and just tease out some of the fibers and some of the guard hairs. Yeah, that should do it. Okay, now we take the feather, try to collect all the fibers, fold it, and pinch it down at the hook eye. See how it looks? Now we have that's good length. Now we have a loop of the whole CDC feather there. I'm gonna change hands now and do a couple of precise hard turns just on top of the hook, just behind the hook eye. And then I sort of fold the feather upwards. I'm gonna try to cut this as close as possible without cutting the thread. And also without cutting the fibers around. Let's see. Oh, that's it. Good. These Schmein scissors are crazy. Crazy sharp. Okay, just a small little finish. And there we go. I would say this is the style of emerger I use for all of my mayflies up till like size big. when I go for like the big, the Vulgata and the Danica, I usually go for slightly different styles, but up to size 12, this is my go-to way to tie the wing sack. Works really well, and if you just don't do the tail and make a slightly heavier body, it's actually a good hatching caddis as well. Okay, one down. Okay, let's go on to the adult mayflies. Let's see, we could do this on the Hanak 130 BL size 14. Excellent dry fly hook, thin and light, yet very strong. Once again, it's not about the body, so just gonna tie that and we'll focus in on when I'm gonna do the wing. Okay, time for the wing. And this style of wing was actually something I was shown probably at least 15 years ago by a really good Danish fly tryer called Nils Werner. Can't really remember his last name, sorry about that. And it's a really simple way to get a natural looking, well floatant CDC wing. And I would say This is a size 14. For that I'm gonna use 2 feathers of like medium size. Doesn't need to be the big ones. But what I want from the feathers is that I have quite a lot of long fibers on them. Like this one is good. You see the majority of the fibers are well in length for the size I want of the wing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna place these two together. I'll need to prep this one a little bit, something like that. I'm gonna place them together. I'm gonna put them with the tips of the feather aligned. The bottom of the feather doesn't really matter at this moment. Just make sure that the tips are similar length. And then I'm gonna switch grip and I'm gonna stroke all the fibers downwards. Probably just above a centimeter or slightly more than the height of the actual wing you want. Something like that. Then I'm just gonna cut off the tips. Doop. Got a dog in here. Oh. Hey Sara, go and eat somewhere else. Okay. Stuff like that can happen when you're around wild animals. Okay. Still have the stems aligned, same length. Now I'm gonna collect all the fibers all the way from the bottom of the feather. And then I'm gonna try to switch hands, turn them around without losing any of the fibers or making the tips uneven. I'm gonna tie them in. What I do then is that I place the CDC bunch on top of the hook, make a pinch and loop, and secure it with a couple of turns, hopefully without twisting them around. You don't really need to, just do a couple of firm turns. You don't have to tighten them, because now we're gonna pull the feathers in position. And this is gonna be really hard to show on video, but when you do it yourself, you're gonna notice it. So when I pull these now, the stem and all the fibers are gonna slide in between the thread wraps. And when you reach the point where you pull the stems outside of the thread wraps, you're gonna have like a small tick. And that's where you want to be. That's where you want to sort of tie down the wing. Because then you have all the stems on the other side of the thread here. You can just feel it for safety. Yeah, that's good. You can do one more proper turn and tie it down securely. Okay, now I'm gonna cut off the excess, but I'm not gonna cut it entirely off. I'm gonna save maybe 3 millimeters, and that could represent the smaller rear wings. And it also helps a lot with the buoyancy of the fly. Then we fold everything facing forward, backwards. and tie it down without really tying on top of the fibers. We're gonna force it backwards with the same favorite dubbing as we used for the thorax on the emerger. Snowshoe. I'm gonna dub this quite hard to get a tight little rope, and then a couple of looser twist with the material at the end. That should do it. Probably way too much. Then I hold the whole wing backwards and I wind at the same spot. Maybe try to get below and under the wing to get the right angle. Yeah, that's it. When you think you have enough, you can just tie it off. Remove the excess fibers. That's perfect. Then a little whip finish or two. I want to build a big bulkhead. There we go. I'm gonna tease out some of the snowshoe dubbing, just to make a slightly heavier thorax and get some of the guard hairs out. But be careful not to brush away too much of the dubbing. Okay, that's it. This is a super simple, very well functioning mayfly pattern that can be tied from everything. Tiny ones, size 24 if you want, but then you're going to use a smaller feather, of course, and just one instead of two. And if you're going to tie them even bigger, you could use 3 feathers, just to get the proper amount of CDC to get them floating without getting like too fat profile. Okay, next one. Now I tie it on the slightly heavier 230 from Hanak, which is also excellent hook. Slightly heavier, of course, but yeah, really strong for big fish. Could be good if you're targeting big trout. And this is sort of a Spanish style mayfly I've been using like the last couple of 2 years. I don't think there's anything wrong with my eyesight, but I'm getting older, and when you're fishing especially smaller flies in quite a big distance, it's getting harder and harder to see them. So what I'm gonna do on this one is that I'm gonna tie in like a cider post that you could see easily from great distance. And this works really well. You can see it, but fish doesn't seem to see it. Everything except the wings is the same as we did on the previous fly. The beaver dubbing, the ribbing, the cocktail tail, yeah. So we'll go on until we come to the wing again. Okay, let's get tying the wing. What I use as a cider and also to split the wing is this is Tiemco's high vis yarn, which is previously treated with floatant, which makes it really suitable for this. Otherwise, I know it's quite popular with using different kinds of floss, stretch floss and stuff, and that's of course also good. But this yarn actually has a built-in function, except for that you see it well. So one strand, or strand is maybe the wrong thing. You have 4 like these in every like main strand of this yarn, and I take one of them, and I on this size 14 I take away like 15 fibers or something. It's not rocket science, but I'm gonna fold it so I don't want it to be too heavy. And then I tie it in on the middle, 2 turns. Make sure it stays on top of the hook shank and tie it down. There we go. And now we can make this one with 3 feathers, just to prove a point that you can vary the amount of feathers. Same thing here. I don't really want. It doesn't matter if the feathers are super long or, but I want fibers with a decent general fiber length. So that's a good candidate. And I'm gonna see if I can find 2 more of those. Smaller, but good enough. And 1 more. A little bit too short fibers. That's good. Same thing here. Align the tips. And then collect all the fibers. Then I try to swap direction. So I have them in my left hand as a left-handed or right-handed tyer, with the tips facing away from the fly. I try to, when I tie this in now, I try to sort of measure in. It's not exact science, but because you can slide it a little bit, but it's a bit trickier with 3 feathers like I have now. And I tie them in a couple of millimeters behind the hook eye, so I have some space in front. Couple of hard turns on the same spot. Make sure it's secure and everything is on top of the hook. Then I go forward with my thread. What I'm gonna do now is try to get the stems out. And then I start I fold it backwards and then I release a little bit of the fibers every time. There we have a stem. Cut it off as close to the hook as possible. There we have another one. Good. And there we should have the last one. All good. Now we should have just the fibers from the the CDC pointing forward. The thing is that stems stiffen up the wing, and if you're fishing like really light tip at 6x and thinner, it could actually help make a fly that twists the leader. Okay, now I'm gonna cut off the excess, the butt ends of the feathers. Do that so I leave like 2.5, 3 millimeters on this particular size. That's good. Now I went forward with the thread. Now I have all the fibers. I pushed them up a little bit with the thread. Now I'm gonna take the yarn and I'm gonna move it through the wing and try to get as close to an even spread as possible. So I get as much, so I try to get like 50% of the fibers on each side of the yarn. That's good. And I tie down the yarn with a couple of turns and I pull it tight. And tie it down with a couple of hard turns and fold the yarn backwards and tie it down. There we go. Now we got a really widespread, nice looking wing that always lands correct on the water. Thorax, we go for the same stuff as last time. Oh, I have some on the vise here. Could use that. Snowshoe, rabbit. And with help of that, I sort of fold everything backwards and force the fibers pointing backwards. There we go. And we finish it off. See, I've frayed the thread a little bit, so I'm going to be careful here. Now I'm going to cut the cider post, depending on how long I want it. I usually want it a little bit shorter than the complete wing. Let's see. Doesn't need that much. You can actually see it from a great distance. Okay, now you can see especially from that side, I can see that the tips are very, very well aligned. So what I do then is I push everything together, and then I go in and pluck some of the fibers just to get a nice shape to the wing. Some of the longest ones also. And then you can just tease out the snowshoe dubbing to get a little wider spread in the front without getting too much bulk up there. Get some of the guard hairs pointing out. That's it. Simple way to tie a really well visible fly. Doesn't twist your leader, floats really well, and can be spotted on a really long distance. I would say it's getting more and more towards that I'm using this one instead of the one I tied before, but I have a feeling that they both have their place in the box. If you find some really picky, annoying trout. Okie dokie. We're gonna do classic nowadays, I would say, Peterson style CDC wing. So we're gonna spin this one. But to begin with, it's the same procedure as last flies. So let's just start. Okay, tail and body all done. And now I'm gonna start prepping the wing that we're gonna spin, as I said, from CDC. And what I wanna start with is pull as much thread from my bobbin as possible without the bobbin touching the base of the vise, because I want the thread to untwist itself as much as possible. Magic tool, this super versatile, really nice tool for using the maximum amount of your feathers. For this size 14, I'm gonna use 2 CDC feathers, and I think this smallest clip, table clip, is good enough in size. Now I'm gonna find feathers with the long fibers, where you have as much as possible of the feathers being at least over 1 centimeter in length. I take one, this is natural brown, and why not? Because it's possible with the magic tool. We could mix it with a different color. We can take this pale olive, for example. Really sexy looking color. And I take a feather that is, I would say, similar to the natural one I took. Take off some of the longest excess fibers. Place the 2 feathers together. Main thing to focus on is fiber length and that they're long enough to put in the magic tool. And also, I would say, density of the fibers. That there is enough feathers on the barbs to make a full, well-floating wing. Just trim off the excess on the sides of the tool. Then I take the paper clip. I don't know if Mark calls them something else, I can't remember. And then I transfer the material from the table clip to the paper clip. And one thing I see a lot of people doing in the beginning when they're using this is when they lift them up, after they place the feathers inside the tool, they squeeze them together when they lift, and then the feathers come out. Then you need to restart. Okay, so either you pick it up like this in one of the shanks, or you lift it on the top. Transfer to the paper clip. Try to catch as many of the fibers. Open up the table one. Now we're gonna have a long scissors, preferably, and cut off the stem as close as the stem
as possible. And try to get a straight line also. This is gonna make your life easier in a minute. Now we have like 4 sides of CDC. Use the, you can see here. Everything is used from this feather, except some of the crap on the top and the bottom. Now, hopefully, my thread is untwisted and as flat as possible. Now I'm gonna use, either you could use a needle to split the thread, or of course Mark has made these little thread splitting tools, which is quite easy to use. And it actually has a small hook here in the end of the tool that is gonna catch the thread. But first I pull out some thread and I try to make the thread as wide as possible. This is 8/0 regular Textream tying thread. And I think the bigger crease should be, or the bigger hook should be good for this. And I place the hook underneath the thread and pull it carefully and then go through with the tool. Now I have the thread split perfectly up the middle. I'm gonna transfer the CDC into the thread, but first I'm gonna just put some moisture on the thread. If you don't want to lick your fingers all the time, you could have a glass of water or something. And I place the material in between the thread and try to, before I let go of the clamp or let go of the material, I try to put it as close with the butt ends as close to the thread as possible without being on the wrong side of the marginal. And then I spin the thread. First, a couple of turns, and then I carefully release it. And then you can take your thumb and finger and push the twist in the thread upwards. It untwists a little bit when you release tension, but it still twists enough. That should definitely be enough for it to stay there. Then I hold the thread and I go upwards with my bobbin. You can actually just try to pull the fibers gently, make sure they are stuck. And they are. You don't want to, when you're not using like a Dyneema thread or anything, or something like that, you don't want to put too much tension with spinning too many turns on the bobbin. Okay, now we're gonna do the wing. One important thing to think about is to trust that the material doesn't take more space than it actually does. So keep all the turns. First I do one full turn without doing anything, and then I grab the thread and the fibers and double them, hold them backwards, upwards, while I do the next turn. So with every turn I do, I lock the previous turn facing upwards and backwards. See there. Okay, that's it. If you have a look at the wing now, you can see that most of the fibers are facing sort of upwards, backwards. And I give it a little nudge to pack it with my nail. And then you can, when you try to find your whip finish, you can actually untwist the thread a little bit. And then just finish it off. Then I'm gonna trim it a little bit. I don't like trimming CDC, but in this case I'm gonna trim the underside. Cut off everything pointing downwards. I don't want to be too close to the hook. I want to leave some CDC to build up some volume here. And then I'm gonna adjust the length by collecting all the fibers. And I want, yeah, like on all mayflies, I want like the length of the hook is a proper length for the wing, I would say. Just pluck the fibers. Main thing to think about is do really tight turns when you wind the CDC hackle, because as I said before, every next turn locks the previous one in position. No stems at all. This one floats like a cork. If you just put a slight drip of CDC oil and distribute it in the wing, it's gonna float for many fish. And you could usually just do a couple of quick air casts and you'll actually whip the mucus from the fish out of the fly, which is quite cool. Yep, and those are the 3 styles of mayfly wings I use. Maybe you wonder, oh, what about spans? I don't use CDC for spans. I use synthetic yarn instead. I think it fishes better. Okay, next chapter. It's gonna be a couple of different caddis wings. You can do caddis wings in a shitload of different ways, but I'm gonna do the 2 regular ones that I usually do, and I'm also gonna, on one of them, I'm gonna do a body of a CDC feather. Okay, caddis it is. On the 230 BL again, size 14, just to make it easy. Big fish hook. Make sure that the thread isn't too twisted from the previous fly. Note to self. That's good. Okay, CDC body. Of course, you can just dub the fly with fibers from CDC. But you get a really nice buoyancy and it looks really good if you instead use the whole feather for winding it as a body. let's see. So what I'm gonna do now is now you want the long feathers, especially if you're on bigger hooks. If you're on tiny ones, you can use smaller feathers, of course. But I start with holding the feather in the butt end, trying to stay off all the fibers as much as possible. Then I place it underneath the hook shank, between my thread and the hook, and then I do 2 loose turns, and then I pull the feather. Hopefully get a grip. Now I collect all the fibers and try to pull it as close to the tip as possible without pulling it through. And when I'm close enough, I increase tension on the thread and secure down the feather. Then I go forward, actually all the way to the hook eye with my thread. You could use a hackle plier for this, or I'm gonna try to do it actually with just my fingers. And then I twist the feather a few turns, and then I start winding it. Touching turns every time. And when I've done a couple of turns, I twist it a little bit more, because you're actually untwisting it when you're winding. When I'm closing in on the hook eye, I'm actually gonna not twist it, just to keep some of the fibers sort of pointing out as a hackle. Then I tie it down, and here actually the stem of the feather is quite heavy, so be a little bit careful to make sure that it's actually secured before you lose tension of the thread. Then I cut off the excess as close as possible to the hook. There we go. Oh, I managed to keep some fibers in there. Then I just pull the stem out. I want to keep as many fibers as possible. If I would do a mayfly body of this instead, I would just trim all the fibers, so you get a slim profile of the fly, or the body of the fly. Okay, next wing. What I want now is straight feathers with quite high density of fibers. Doesn't need to be the longest once again, but this one is excellent. And that one is, let's see. Could find a better one. Oh, that's fat. Nice. Quite long fibers. Now, once again, align the tips, place them together. Make sure the tips are even. Collect all the fibers. And I try to place them like this, so they're back to belly, or they spoon. The feathers spoon. That's a way to put it. Then I measure it in. I want it slightly longer. I would say start with twice the length of the hook. Move, change hands. 2 loose turns. Make sure the feathers are on top of the fly. And then I pull carefully. And when the feathers are, I would say, when the tips are not a full centimeter behind the hook bend, it's probably 4 millimeters, I would say. Yeah, 4 millimeters longer than the hook bend. I put tension on the thread and do a couple of 3 to 4 turns. Now, what I'm gonna do is try to get rid of the stems of the buttons of the feathers. So I go in with my scissor. I fold the feather on top backwards. Go in with my scissor, cut off the stem. And then I actually take my scissor and cut off the feathers, or the what do you call them? The fibers from the stem. So I want to keep as many of the fibers as possible. Same thing with the one facing forward. Cut off the stem as close to the hook as possible. And then I cut off the fibers with my scissor. I got a nice mustache of fibers facing forward. And then I fold them backwards and sort of sideways. So I spread them around the hook, on top of the hook. And I do a couple of turns, tie down some of the fibers. And then we're done. A little bit, slightly bigger head I want. There we go. Then I just cut the thread. And I have a look at the whole thing. And I trim it a little bit on the underside. Now that's a really buggy looking caddis with a lot of CDC still intact in the fly. Almost 2 full feathers, and also almost a full feather for the body of the fly. Simple, really effective, good all-round pattern. I would say up to size 12. Bigger than that, I usually do it differently, but not many of the caddies are bigger. All CDC caddies. So the final one is I would say, I call it sparkling caddies. And what I've done is I just dubbed the body with golden brown eye stub. And now I'm gonna do the wing and the head of the fly. And for this I'm gonna use 2 CDC feathers. I take a slightly darker one in a length that is enough for the smallest table clip. Yeah, we'll go for the smallest one. So that's all right in length. And I take a slightly lighter one. This one is great for it, really dense and fluffy fibers. Take off some of the excess. And I place this on the table clamp. And I'm gonna integrate some iStub in the wing. This is what's so awesome with the magic tool. It's super simple to mix different kinds of material. So I take a small pinch of iStub, and I try placing the fibers on top of the feather in an angle towards the stem of the feather. And if you found 2 different lengths of feather, always place the shortest one on the bottom, because you can use the longer one to pull the feather below down. Then I take the darker one, put it on top of the other one, and then I pull the whole package down into the table clamp. There we go. You can take a needle and try to get as much of the fibers facing a 90-degree angle towards the tool. You can also tease out some of the iStub. Then I'm gonna cut off the excess on that side, change and cut off the tips on the other side. Then I transfer it to the material clip, paper clip. Make sure it's in there. And before I lift the material off the table clamp, I usually do like this a couple of times. Just because if any small fibers has gotten stuck in the tool, then you're gonna release that and don't have to redo the whole thing. Then I trim off the stem as close as the stem as possible. Same as we did on the Mayfly. Okay, 4 sides of CDC and a bunch of iStub. Sparkly and nice. Let's see, where did I put my thread splitter? I don't know if you noticed, but since I dubbed the body, I've been leaving the bobbin hanging straight down and giving the thread time to untwist. And now I'm on a 6/0 thread, slightly thicker. And try to smoothen it out. Make it as flat as possible by sort of stroking it downwards. Then I take the tool I used earlier, the thread splitter, and just split it. Just split it. What I want now, if I see that the majority of the fibers are longer on one side of the tool, I want them backwards. Take the material, put it in between the thread, pull it in position as close to the butt ends as possible, and release the material clamp. And if you feel like you got a little bit too much of the material on the buttons, you can actually just poke them a little bit. Then carefully spin the thread. First like 20 seconds or 10 seconds or something. Keep the tension on the thread all the time. And then I pull downwards. And because of the iStub, it's going to be slightly harder to get the material to really lock in place and twist. So I twist it a little bit more. That's why I went for the 6/0 thread instead of the 8/0. Still don't want to overdo the twisting. can actually break the thread. And I take a brush, tease out the fibers, and here you can actually also see that you have spun the hackle good enough. Okay, let's do the wing. And this is actually very similar to what I did on the mayfly just a moment ago. First, one full turn at least, and then I do a turn and I hold the fibers backwards this time, not rearwards or upwards backwards, just backwards. And really tight turns. It's gonna feel like you're actually barely moving forward. So it's important to get as much of the material as possible on a as short space as possible, because you can always push it a little bit in the end. Just make tiny room for your thread to make a head. And this looks like shit at the moment, but we're gonna sort that out. Unspin the thread. Important to remember always before you finish it off, because the thread is quite fragile when it's spun as hard as that. Okay, that's good. I hold all the fibers backwards and just do a couple of whip finishes. That's it. Looks like a small bird or something. But I'm gonna trim it. Sort of tease out the fibers. And then I trim it on the underside. Always good with sound effects. This is gonna actually look a little bit like a streaking caddis. Only thing is that it's made out of CDC and dubbing instead. That's good. And don't cut the wing. I try to sort of pull it off in the length I want, which is slightly longer than the hook. If you have some rogue fibers pointing, you can always just either pluck them off or cut them off. There's plenty of CDC in this fly to keep it floatant for a long time anyway. Okay, there we have the sparkling spun CDC caddis, and you see what I did with the fibers when I wound them and pulled them backwards. I made a wing that is actually pointing backwards, and it's all fibers and some sparkling dubbing, and the dubbing actually I think is a big part of why I like this pattern so much. It catches fish really well, especially in fast currents. And the ice tub actually makes it really visible on the water. You get reflexes, especially on sunny days. You get quite heavy reflexes, which makes it as easy to spot as like the mayfly I did with the orange post. So that was quite a heavy episode. I hope if you haven't watched the whole thing straight through, that you took yourself through it and maybe caught up some useful information, and hopefully a couple of tips you can use yourself. As said, there are many different versions or variants you can do with CDC, but these are my favorites, and they sort of cover most of my different imitations. Everything from small, tiny mayflies to quite big caddies. So that's it for me. Thanks a lot for sticking through, and hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to win this little kit of flies, you can make sure to subscribe to our the Fly Dressing YouTube channel and leave a comment below here, maybe what you would use them for, and one of you guys will win the set of flies I tied here today. Okay, take care guys, see you on the water.